The June 29 meeting of the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct is now convened. Begin with the call to order. If each commissioner could introduce themselves to the general public. Hello.
Good afternoon. I'm Florence Nakakuni, former U.S. Attorney for Hawaii.
Jen.
Hello, I'm Janet Mason from the League of Women Voters.
Robert.
Aloha, my name is Robert Harris. I'm the Executive Director and General Counsel for the Hawaii State Ethics Commission.
Kristen.
Good afternoon, Kristen. Izumi Nitao, Executive Director, Hawaii Campaign Spending Commission.
Nikos.
Aloha, Nikos Leverins, Advisory Board Member for Common Cause Hawaii.
Okay, thank you. We're going to begin with the approval of minutes. We deferred the June 1st minutes from last meeting. Robert Harris was excused. Are there any proposed edits or revisions to the draft? If not, the June 1, 2022 meeting minutes are approved. The June 15, 2022 minutes, are there any suggested edits or revisions to the draft? If not, the June 15 minutes are approved. We'll move to public testimony. The one thing I would ask of witnesses is not to mention any names of any public official. If you can avoid that, but just pretty much make the point, the type of issue you're interested in. If we can begin, I see our friend Gary Hooser. Why don't you begin, Gary?
Yeah, thank you, Judge, and thank you, Commissioners. I'll be very brief. You all have my written comments and testimony, and I did put the word out on my email list and encourage others who supported those points to also send in their comments. But essentially, my suggestions are, there's 5 of them. First of all, the full public funding for all state and county elections, similar to what's being done in Maine and other places, number 1. Number 2, the suggestion would be to reduce the cap on campaign donations, now at $6,000, $4,000, and $2,000 to $100. In Montana, it's $180 per election. 3, banning contributions from corporations and unions. 21 other states do this. We've mentioned before banning the solicitation or acceptance of campaign contributions during the session. And finally would be limit the candidate campaign war chests. This is done in Alaska, and it made the test of the Alaska Supreme Court. I've attached at the bottom of my testimony links to the source material that will give you more information if you want to explore the 21 states and what the other states are doing. I'd be happy to answer questions either today or later if I could be helpful. Well, thank you very much.
And also remember, Gary, if you stay with us today, at the end, you can always submit additional written comments on what transpires today. I have one question for you, Gary.
Sure.
You know, many of the points are well taken and many people agree. Reducing caps on campaign donations, possibly banning contributions from corporations and unions, limiting campaign war chests. I mean, those are all points that others have made as well. One concern I have in doing all of that, and I'm very open to that, what do we do with these super PACs and people that can self-fund? If we're reducing, you know, the amount of money people can receive that, you know, aren't wealthy, don't have a super PAC, does it give too much power to the super PAC or the self-funder, the wealthy candidate? Gary?
Yes, that question has come up, and I've read others sharing that same concern. I believe there are, I haven't explored the answers to that at this point. I do believe other states have increased disclosure and increased regulations governing those activities within a Supreme Court decision, allowing super PACs. So you can't ban them, I don't believe, but you might be able to increase regulations in other ways. I'll tell you what, I'll dig into that and find out what other places are doing and report back.
Thank you, Gary. Are there any other questions for Gary, Flo, Janet, Robert?
May I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Yes, please.
Gary, addressing the self-funded candidate, do you think that there would be some obligation or way to require them to raise a certain level? Again, in a publicly financed election model, there is sometimes an obligation to raise a certain amount of money within your district, for example. Is there some other mechanism maybe to show that they're gaining support within constituents as a mechanism of sort of requiring them to raise that money before being able to self-fund or self-finance?
I believe I'll call it the Maine model, but Arizona and Connecticut also are doing similar things. You require any candidate who wants to do public funding to get so many signatures and $5 donations or some low level of contribution, so it's not just from random people on the street. And so yes, everyone should, if you're going to abide by public funding or opt in, you should have to prove your credibility, if you would, as a real candidate. As to self-funding, I'm not sure how that would work in terms of the rates. It's my understanding in other states, and I'll use Maine as an example. I think Connecticut too. A majority of candidates utilize them successfully. In Connecticut, I believe all 4 gubernatorial candidates in 2014 used public funding. So that, above all else, I think is what's needed. The other suggestions are important, but public funding levels the playing field to a great extent. The self-funded candidate, the rich guy coming in, is what you're talking about, right? What do we do about him or her? And I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah, I think it is the mega wealthy question. We do have some great currently elected officials who have either self-funded or borrowed large amounts of money in order to run. And just trying to make sure there is some thought given that we don't make it too exclusive only for the mega rich to run. I agree, it's probably not maybe the tail wagging the dog, but it's something you would like to try to put some thought to as well.
Right. I believe there's also a stigma attached to that. If the majority of the candidates are running through public funding, the mega rich ones would have a negative stigma attached to their race, possibly. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. If you have thoughts on that, would be interested in hearing.
Yeah, I certainly don't think that the fear of the super rich people running should keep us from pursuing public funding options. So thank you.
Yeah, and to be clear, sorry, I don't mean to create a dialect here. I appreciate just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that should be a reason to avoid public financing. I just simply suggesting it's something some thought should be given to. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you.
Kristen, did you have any questions?
No, I didn't. I don't know if Gary or Tony do.
Okay,
I have a
Nico?
quick question, if I may. Gary, do you know what impact Maine's current campaign financing regime had on the overall cost of elections compared to what transpired before? Because the reality is that here in Hawaii, especially at our legislative races, we have candidates who can win, with $10,000 or $20,000, which is, in the grand scheme of things, not really a very substantial sum. So could you speak to the impact that Maine's current regime had on overall campaign spending at the state level?
Thank you for the question, Nikos. I cannot speak to that right now. I noticed Nate Hicks is prepared to testify, and I understand he's also familiar with the Maine law and perhaps can add more value to the conversation. But this is all good conversation for me, and I'm committed to doing some homework and following up and try to get answers to those questions for all of you.
Any further questions from the commissioner?
Kristen has her hand up. I think she has a question.
No, I just have a comment that we're talking about Maine, but you have Maine here. You have Jonathan Wayne here. So just,
Okay, good.
I don't even want to activate him sooner rather than later, but you've got
Okay.
like the guy
All
here.
right, all right.
Okay, do we
You
have
don't
any?
need, you don't need me, you got the guy.
So you
Okay,
have Nate Hicks.
thank you,
waiting.
Gary.
Thank you.
Nate Hicks.
Do we-
Nate,
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just also wanted to show my support for publicly financed elections, or clean elections, as many people are calling it, and also say how dramatic of an impact fundraising has on our local elections. Those who spend more in Hawaii win. Races were in two-person races for the Democratic primary House, for those candidates that can outspend their opponent by at least $6,000, win at a 90% race or 90% rate. So money wins as long as you can raise a substantial fund. It puts you in a fantastic position, and it leads to very many elections that aren't even contested. Out of the 56% of all Democratic primary House races in the last since 2008 have been uncontested. Just one candidate runs and wins. And that's largely because a lot of these candidates have a significant sum to spend. The average top spender spends over $29,000, where the second candidate spends only $9,000. So there's this massive gap between the top dogs and the challenger, which keeps a lot of potential candidates away. And so I think it's incredibly important that we do establish a publicly financed system to allow more candidates the opportunity and to give a true democracy to the people. They need to be able to have a fair shot at competing and choosing officials that might have a chance at winning. So that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
If not, any further witnesses, Ronan? No further witnesses, so therefore we're going to move on to item number 3, discussion of campaign finance reform, led by Kristen. Kristen, it's all you.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. Thank you. We have a slide deck just because our predecessors all did their fancy schmancy slide deck. So we have ours, and unfortunately there are like 40 slides, but we'll get through it as best we can. So if I can start the slide deck. And the beginning of the slide deck will just show you that the topics we intend to discuss, the second slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the Campaign Spending Commission, public funding, limiting contributions and expenditures, expanding the government contractor ban, enhancing the fundraiser ban, and increase penalties for violations and administrative investigative tools. Exactly what's on the agenda. So if I can start with the Hawaii Campaign Spending Commission, I want to move to the next slide where it just shows you what our mission is. Just some background information real quickly. Our mission is to maintain the integrity and transparency of the campaign finance process by enforcing the law, educating the public, administering public financing, and training campaign committees, which would consist of candidate and non-candidate committees and those super PACs, in order to encourage compliance. So just one more slide to show you us who we are. We consist of 5 commissioners. So these are volunteers from the community who are appointed by the governor from a list of 10 nominees submitted by the Judicial Council. And they serve a 4-year term and may be reappointed for an additional 4-year term. We also have 5 staff members that consist of myself. We have the Associate Director, Tony Baldomero, who is also here, our General Counsel, Gary Cam, who's also here, and our Administrative Assistant, Yayoi Tumamau, and our Elections Assistant, Janelle Tano, all here to help. We are an office that is administratively attached Department of the Accounting and General Services, or DAGS. That is an executive branch. And we oversee or regulate approximately 580 candidate committees, of which 368 are running for office currently, and 268 non-candidate committees, or PACs, each with 1 to 3 officers. So you can see that it's a very robust group of campaign committees that we try to really help and do the, follow the law compliance so that there's no enforcement. And we also lastly have no investigator on staff. So we do obviously put in a budget so that we can hire investigators if we need to. Moving on to the next slide, I'm just going to jump in right now because this is the hot topic, public funding. And I'm happy to, at this point in time, introduce and turn this over to our Associate Director, Tony Baldemaro. And of course, the subsequent slides later on, so we can just move really quickly, you're going to hear from Jonathan Wayne, who's the Executive Director of the Maine Clean Elections Program. So I'll let Tony take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Aloha, Judge. Aloha, members. Aloha, everyone. I'm grateful for the opportunity to participate in this very important meeting. So let me just go through my slides on public funding and first give you a little history on the origins of what we call partial public funding in the state of Hawaii. So when we look at the history, we have to go back to 1976 and a very benchmark decision or case called Buckley-Vallejo. And in that case, they struck down mandatory expenditure limits, which they found to be unconstitutional. And that was in place for 4 years prior to that, 1972. So from that, the discussion took place in our 1978 Constitutional Convention, and Article 2, Section 5 was ratified and passed by the members. So in that article, the legislature was, two things happened. The legislature was directed to establish a fund for partial public financing, and then expenditure limits were authorized for those receiving public funds. So it was created as an alternative to the striking down of the mandatory expenditure limits. For those that were willing to voluntarily agree to the limit, they were provided with an incentive, and that was the partial public funding. In 1979, the Hawaii Election Campaign Fund was created. That is the same name it holds to today. Okay, as far as what the Hawaii Election Campaign Fund is, it's a trust fund within the state treasury set up specifically for the financing of partial public funding candidates or candidates that qualify. From 1980 to 2008, the checkoff was $2. From 2008 to current, that went up to $3. And that was increased because of the comprehensive public funding bill that was passed in 2008, providing full public funding for Hawaii County Council qualifying candidates. I'll be talking about that on the next slide or so. The other funding source besides the checkoff comes from interest on the principal of the balance, as well as escheats from such things as prohibited contributions, such as false name contributions, anonymous contributions, and those types of things. We used to have fines that used to go into the fund, but that was taken out of the law, and now the fines go into the general fund. So like I said, the Hawaii Election Campaign Fund provides public financing for candidates. And then for a 20-year period from about 1998 to 2017, it provided for the operational funds for the commission. This is just an idea of what the fund balance is. As of June 30th, 2021, it was about 1.4 million. I can tell you that the fund is at 1.6 million today. It also shows you over the years, the tax checkoff. You can see that the tax checkoff kind of is on the decline, even though 2021 is a good year for us. But these are the amounts coming in via the tax checkoff. So in 2008, the legislature passed Act 244, which came out of HB 661, and it created a pilot program for full public financing. The statute was based off the clean elections model, which actually the origin came from states such as Maine. In 2010, we gave out $147,000 to 8 candidates. In 2012, we gave out $215,000 to 8 candidates. And in 2014, we did not run the program because the program required at least $3.5 million be in the trust fund. And before that election, the fund dipped below that amount. I do have some success stories in 2010. One candidate, a first-time candidate, took public funding, was able to beat an incumbent. In 2012, 3 first-time candidates took public funding. One of those candidates was able to beat an incumbent, and that candidate is now a member of the State House. As far as partial public financing, we've been giving out public funding since 1980. These are the amounts that we've been giving out. You can see in 2020, we gave out $85,000, and you can see how many candidates ran in 2020, how many candidates received public funding, 16 candidates, and how many of those won, 3. The most we've ever given out was in 1994, and that was $860,000. And the candidate that received the most was a candidate that received $312,000, candidate running for governor. Okay, so how does the program work? There's 3 components to the program. First of all, the voluntary expenditure limit. Number 2, a candidate has to raise a minimum amount of qualifying contributions that's defined as a monetary contribution of $100 or less from individual Hawaii residents. So that minimum amount depends on the office, and it ranges from State House, which is $1,500, to governor, which is $100,000. And then there's a maximum amount that's allowed for each office, and that's based off of a percentage of what the expenditure limit is for that particular office. So 3 components: expenditure limit, minimum qualifying campaign contribution amount, and the maximum amount. There's also other requirements. In addition to agreeing to the limit, you have to be a candidate on the ballot. You have to have an opponent on the ballot. Then you have to agree to an audit of the public funds, keep expense reports. And then once you receive your minimum amount of qualifying campaign contributions, you have to then apply for the money and file your statement of qualifying campaign contributions, which is your list of these, what we call QCCs. Okay, that's partial public funding in a nutshell. Now I'll go ahead and introduce Jonathan Wayne, Executive Director for the Maine Commission on Governmental Ethics and Election Practices, to talk about public funding. Thank you, Jonathan, for being here.
Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you very much to the commission members for the invitation. I intended just to give the broadest overview of our program. That'll take about 6 minutes, and I just have 6 slides to discuss, but I'm happy to answer any questions to the extent the commission wants to allow for that. But I see you have a full agenda, so I don't want to go over what's an appropriate amount of time. Our program was enacted by a citizen initiative in the 90s, and our commission started operating it in 2000. And it provides for an optional system of full public campaign funding for candidates for governor and for the legislature. It's a system of full public financing, and what I mean by that is after the candidates qualify for the public funds, they can accept no cash or no in-kind contributions. They can't even give them their own campaign money. So practically speaking, what that means is every campaign good and every campaign service that they want to pay for has to be paid for with public funds from the state. Candidates have to show that they have a threshold of public support in their legislative districts by collecting a minimum number of $5 qualifying contributions. And I'll discuss those more in a second. What I wanted to say is that I'm very pleased to present our program. I'm very proud to be associated with it. But I saw a recommendation from the executive director of your campaign spending program in an email correspondence that she recommended that any consideration of a full public campaign finance program be studied carefully. And I really want to endorse that. I would urge the commission or the private advocates who are out there to design a program that is right for Hawaii and not just assume that the Maine program is just the right fit for you. I wanted to mention that there are other, although the 2 members of the public I heard are really endorsing a full public campaign finance program, there are systems of public funding that allow for some private contributions. So for example, the New York City program is also looked to as a model. And that the design of that program is that candidates who are in the program and receiving public funds can receive small dollar contributions of up to 2 from individuals. And I don't know the full set of contribution restrictions, but the idea is that small dollar contributions from individuals are matched at a rate of 8-1. So if I'm a candidate for mayor of the city of New York and I receive $100 from a registered voter, and I'm in the program, the system will give me $800 in public funds. There's also a program in Seattle that is capturing a lot of attention. So whether it's full public financing or private or a mix, I recommend that you think about the options carefully. And in particular, do you want to allow regular citizens to donate $50 or $100 or more to a candidate? Personally, I don't have a problem with that, but that is not allowed under our program. So there's a lot of design options to consider. And I just wanted, if you have an opportunity to study the options, I would encourage you to do that. I'm going to talk about how our candidates qualify. They have to collect the $5 qualifying contributions. They can receive those by check or credit card or cash. There's a documentation requirement that I think I will just skip over, but they collect these qualifying contributions in a period of about 3 months and 3 weeks at the beginning of the election year. And if they're running for the House, they have to collect 60 qualifying contributions to receive a basic level of funding. If they are running for the state Senate, they need to collect 175 qualifying contributions. And if they're running for governor, they have to collect 3,200 qualifying contributions. The next slide shows the amounts of funding that is available to candidates. So I'm going to stick with the upper part of the graph right now. This is the basic level of funding that is available to House and Senate candidates. So a House candidate collecting 60 qualifying contributions will receive a payment for the primary and the general election that total a little more than $6,000. A Senate candidate who qualifies for the basic level of funding will receive a little more than $24,000. But our program was redesigned in a 2015 citizen initiative to allow for candidates who want to receive more funding than just the basic amount. And especially our legislative candidates, there's a recognition that some candidates are in districts that are not that competitive and they don't need to spend a lot of money. So they may be happy with the basic level of funding, but there are other candidates who are in very competitive districts. I heard earlier a fear of being outspent being a problem with the public funding system. So this allows candidates to, the idea of this program redesign in 2015 was that candidates can continue to collect these qualifying contributions, not just at the beginning of the election year through April, but now they can collect them all the way through mid-October to receive supplemental payments up to those maximum amounts that are at the bottom of the chart, which are $17,000 for House and $67,000 for Senate. I don't know if those supplemental payments is something that you would want to consider, but it's a relatively new part of our program. We're administering it for the 3rd year, and it allows for different levels of funding for different candidates. And I want to apologize, I don't have a lot of the numbers in front of me relating to our gubernatorial program, which has been less successful in attracting candidates. And so I'm sorry, I may not be prepared to answer questions about the candidates for governor in the program. I wanted to say a word about the cost of the program. As of right now, in the past 2 election cycles, 55% of the candidates who are running for the legislature opted into the program. And that means that 45% of the legislative candidates decided to finance their campaigns the old-fashioned way through traditional campaign contributions. This year, we expect to pay to the legislative candidates alone a total of around $4 million. So right now in our fund, we've just made the initial payments for the general election, and I think we should have about $4.4 million in our fund right now. We make the payments from a special revenue account within Maine state government, which is called the Maine Clean Election Fund. And the largest source of funding for our Maine Clean Election Fund is an annual transfer of $3 million from the general fund. So for those of you private citizens, reform groups, or members of the commission who would like to explore a public campaign financing program, what I'd urge you to do is think about the cost, because I saw Tony's slides earlier about how much revenue comes in from the taxpayer checkoff. It seemed to be about 125,000 or more or less year to year. That's not going to add up to enough to pay out to all these candidates. So a real key program design is, are you expecting the legislature to fund this from the general fund, or are you expecting the legislature to set up some sort of enhanced special revenue, like I heard that there are fines and fees and so forth. Could that possibly fund this program? It's an important thing to think about if you want to recommend a public campaign funding program, because the program's only going to work if candidates feel that the money is secure and there's enough money. And so I encourage you to think big. I encourage you to shoot for the program of your dreams, but you also have to be pragmatic in terms of what is your legislature really going to be willing to fund. So I just say that with a word of caution, but I wish you the best in thinking through those issues. Finally, I just wanted to mention some of the accountability measures that we administer and that I would recommend. And my overall message on this is make sure you have enough agency staff to do the job. I heard Ms. Izumi Nitao say earlier that or possibly it was Tony, that there are 5 employees of the Campaign Spending Commission. I'm sure they have their hands full with those 500 candidate committees and non-candidate committees. So here are some of the functions that we perform, and that you would just want to make sure that your agency that administers this is capable of doing it. Agency staff should review carefully the qualifying materials. You need to be alert that some people, unfortunately, will cut corners, and some people will even attempt fraud. And so you want to make sure that the public funds are only paid to the right candidates and the right amounts, because these are taxpayer dollars. Once the candidates qualify and they're for the funds and they're spending them and they're filing campaign finance reports with you, you want to be able to, I think, review all those expenditures to make sure that they comply with your whatever spending restrictions you institute. And then finally, we recommend some auditing, and I saw a reference in Tony's slideshow to auditing. That we audit through outside auditors. And what I mean by auditing is it's not just enough to look at what they say they're doing with the public funds in their campaign finance reports, but it really behooves the agency, I think, to look at bank statements and a selection of invoices to verify what actually was being purchased with those public funds. So thank you very much. That actually concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to have field questions at a later time or by email from members of the commission. If some of the private advocates want to ask for information, please feel free to email me, but keep in mind that we are in a gubernatorial election year, and if it requires a lot of research, we may not be able to tackle it, but we're happy to be as helpful as we can, given our time constraints. Thank you. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission wants to send my way now, if that's appropriate, or I'm happy to, I love these campaign finance topics.
We have some questions, Flo.
Good afternoon,
yes.
Jonathan. I'm Flo Nakakuni, and I just have a couple of questions. The first question is, of the 55% of the 2020 legislative candidates who participated in this program, how many won their elections?
You know, we don't track, I mean, we do track who wins and loses. We haven't compiled that information. I can tell you that in the current legislature that is just ending this year, about 60% of our legislators did participate in the program, but I don't have, I'm sorry, we don't have an easy way to gather the sort of the win, that kind of, to know the ratio of winning versus losing.
And also my last question, how large is your staff?
Our staff is 6 people.
Did you say 6?
6.
Thank you.
I just want to say other agencies are much larger. Connecticut, I believe the Connecticut program is still very similar to ours. Connecticut's program staff is significantly larger than ours.
Thank you.
Janet, do you have anything?
No, thank you very much, Jonathan.
Nikos has his virtual.
Hi, yes, Jonathan, thank you for being with us today. Could you perhaps answer the question I posed to Mr. Kuzer earlier about the impact that Maine's clean elections framework had, with respect to comparisons between pre-clean elections to the landscape that we have right now? Was there a reduction in spending also? Or was it about the same? Also, did Maine sort of have a problem with members engaged in illicit activity? in the way that we're dealing with here today?
I'm going to, separately from this presentation, I'll have to see if we've done any research recently on how it has impacted spending by candidates. I can say almost 100% certainty that it hasn't resulted in a reduction in spending by candidates. I think the last time we examined it, to be honest, was we do a study report every 4 or 8 years, and I think we looked at it in the past, and I think we saw sort of a moderate increase of spending continue, but I'll send you whatever I can manage. And I'm sorry, I forgot the second question.
Were there cases of state or local elected officials engaged in illicit conduct that really bolstered the case for moving toward something like the clean elections regime that you have right now?
Our program, as I mentioned, was adopted through a citizen initiative. I moved to Maine 19 years ago in order to take my current position, and so I missed the citizen initiative, but I am pretty positive that it was not the result of corruption. And the one comment I would make on that is, as someone who's lived in other parts of the country, I grew up in Chicago. I won't give you my life story, but I've lived in areas that have a high rate of corruption and governmental ethics problems. And then I moved to Maine 19 years ago, where there actually is very little corruption. And I think that public campaign funding, this is just my personal opinion, is not going to be, I would be skeptical of it as an antidote to isolated problems with corruption. My personal viewpoint is, given human frailty in any population of public servants, there are going to be some who act in a self-serving or criminal manner. And I don't know that public funding is a solution for that. The kinds of pros and cons that I would urge the commission to think about if you're thinking about recommending public campaign finance program, a full system, is things like, is the cost of fundraising as a candidate a barrier to new people joining public service? I think that's one of our biggest benefits that we can point to in terms of our program, is getting new people into the system, because there are always people who just don't want to raise money, or they're scared of the weight of that. Other questions could be like, do elected officials feel that they have independence from campaign contributors? Is that a problem? Is there an unhealthy relationship between elected officials and people who have an interest before state government? Those are the kinds of legislative and policy issues that I would recommend be thought through in terms of whether going with a full public campaign financing program is worth it. This is just my opinion, but I don't know that corruption in itself is the right rationale.
Mahalo for your candid responses. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
Robert, did you have any questions?
No questions. Just thank you for joining us. Really appreciate your thoughts and experience. We call it Mana'o here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wayne.
Thank you. I'm going to stick around for an hour with my camera off, because I love to hear about these issues, but then it'll be time to get ready for bed. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Hey, Jonathan. Aloha.
Kristen?
No, thank you, Jonathan. I guess we can resume our slide deck. We have some, to wrap up this section, we have some possible bills for the commission to consider as far as moving forward in light of the discussion that I'll have Tony wrap up with, and then I'll move on to limiting contributions and expenditures.
Yeah, so this is just two ideas for the commission to explore. One is to either increase the current partial public funding program to adjust for cost of living and to make the program more appealing and definitely more used. As we look at the 2022 election, Kristen mentioned there's 368 candidates running this year. 46% of those candidates agreed to voluntarily cap their spending according to their expenditure limits for their respective offices. And then about 7% of those have stated their intent of seeking public funding. So making the program more appealing. And then number two, exploring the idea of full public funding and possibly recommending an appropriation to hire a third party to look at existing programs in the US. It basically comes down to two things, funding of a full public funding program and having sufficient resources to administer such a program. So with 5 staff members, 368 candidates, there's things that need to be considered as we move forward on this topic.
So yeah, that don't know whether there's any more questions before we move on. I'll defer to you, Judge Foley, Chair Foley.
Any questions, Flo, Janet,
No, thank you.
Robert, Nicholas? No questions, Kristen.
Okay, great. All right. All right. Well, then we'll move on to limiting contributions and expenditures. So again, purposes of launching into this other category. The next slide will show you what we currently are at, which it depends on what a candidate committee can receive in contribution. It depends on what office they're seeking. So for a 2-year office, we have a $2,000. For a 4-year non-statewide office, $4,000. And for a 4-year statewide office, it's $6,000. Hence what you've heard before, particularly with Mr. Hoosier, is $2,000, $4,000, and $6,000. That's what the law says right now. So I also want to talk about expenditures. Right now, there's only 8 authorized expenses for candidates to use, and the 8 are listed there. You know, the big one, of course, is for any purpose directly related to the campaign. The second one is a mixed benefit. If you're using, let's say, your car to get around, to fundraise, to attend, to go door to door, whatever, we just ask that you monitor your mileage so that we can figure out what will we pay with campaign funds and what is a personal matter. 3 is making donations to community service, educational, youth, recreational, charitable, scientific, or literary organizations with caps of $4,000, $8,000, or $12,000. Those are generally a reflection of what your contribution limit is. So if you have a $2,000 contribution limit, you have a cap of 4. If you have a $4,000 contribution limit, it's capped at 8. And if you have a $6,000 contribution limit, it's capped at 12. The 4th one is just to make donations to public schools, public libraries with certain caps. The 5th is to award full-time scholarships. The 6th is not purchasing more than 2 tickets to an event held by another candidate or committee. 7, to make contributions to your party. And 8 is ordinary and necessary expenses. And number 8 is the only one that can be used by elected officials. That 8 is the one that always is sort of the one that has been a problem when we're talking about legislative allowance monies. And that tends to be the one we have been that we've looked at before when we're doing some reviews of legislative allowances. So having said that's a backdrop, possible bills as far as this area is whether we limit cash contributions to $100, which is similar to the present threshold for calabash bowls, because cash has no money trail. So right now, the current law permits a calabash bowl, which you have to have a minimum of 10 people contributing to the bowl at the same political function, and the total amount collected must aggregate to less than $100. So we seriously would like to explore this because we've had a number of investigations or inquiries where the money in, to follow money with the cash that is cash and not, let's say, a check or some other type of, there's just no trail there. So it's very difficult for us to monitor it. So I think this is a really good bill that we'd like to set forth. The next bill is prohibiting candidates from using campaign funds to purchase 2 tickets to another candidate's fundraiser and thus subsidize the candidate's campaign and or build war chest as well as build factions. We kind of discussed this amongst the commission in the first half when we met. So this is another consideration. And lastly, I'm going to let I know Janet Mason, there has been a bill, Senate Bill 2417, that was increased, that would have increased the monetary caps, the so-called 4,000, 8,000, and 12,000 for charitable or community donations. I don't know, Janet, if you want to speak a little bit to this.
Sure. This bill was introduced this session and League actively opposed it. Our position is that the campaign spending contribution should be used for campaign expenses only. So we do not support the donations to public schools, donations for scholarships and so forth. That's about it.
So for further clarity, Janet, for the 8 authorized expenses that we just talked about, you would really only like to see campaign funds used for the first one for any purpose directly related to the campaign?
Exactly.
And would you go so far as trying to eliminate the other 7 possibilities?
Yes.
Okay, just for
Yeah.
clarity.
And Kristen, if I could follow up, I have a similar concern. I wasn't that familiar with it, but when I look at this, I'm saying, why is campaign spending for things other than your campaign? And it almost seems like vote buying, taking money from one group to give it to another group to try to get their votes. There's something, how did this come about? What's the history of this?
Tony or Gary, would you like to respond?
I don't know the history of all of the inclusions, I should say additions to the purpose directly related to the campaign. I can say that number 5 there, the scholarship one, that bill was passed. I've never seen a bill passed so quickly. That bill, it just flew through.
So do you mind if I follow up though? I mean, how often are you, maybe ask this another way. As far as expenditures, where do you see these most often spent? I mean, my presumption is besides number 1, you're seeing number 6, purchasing 2 tickets, or number 8 would be 3 your most common use. Is that accurate? And do you mind just kind of giving some pragmatic from your experience of sort of just how you see this commonly being used?
Sure, I'm going to let Tony field that one.
Robert, I would say more than 90% of spending is under item 1, directly related. This would be for your advertising, your signs, your banners, things that are specific and directly related to a candidate's campaign. The other areas, we do see charitable donations. So out of the 3 allowances, donations to charity, donations to public schools, public libraries, awarding scholarships, most of the activity we see is in the charitable donation area. But like I said, 90% is in the directly related, over 90.
How much do you see in number 8, for example, basically spending to go to trips, to be part of an organization, et cetera? Is that a decent amount?
I cannot put a percentage on it, but yes, we do see a lot of activity in that area for conferences and workshops on the mainland, yes.
Number 8, Robert, also got used when you have neighbor island candidates who take statewide positions and need some expenses paid for them to build an office on Oahu or commuting back and forth. But you can see how number 8 can overlap with legislative allowance, right? So anyway, yes. I suppose then we should put a pin in this one for the commission to further consider whether it would like to propose some amendments to this specific statute, I suppose.
I definitely would like to see a bill that would eliminate expenditures for anything other than for a campaign.
Okay. All right. Then I guess we can move on to the next one, since we'll, like I said, put a pin in that one. And the next one's expanding the government contractor ban, which I'll let Gary take over.
Good afternoon, commissioners and members of the public. So currently in the HRS 11-355, if you're a state or county contractor, you are prohibited from making any contributions between the execution of the contract and the completion of the contract. Some of the contracts that fall within the ban are contracts for the buying of state or county property, the selling of any land or building to the state or county, rendition of personal services, or furnishing of material supplies or equipment to the government. We have a rule that further defines personal services, and that means the performance of services in the fields of health, law, engineering, architecture, construction, accounting, actuarial science, performing arts, or consulting. And the funds, of course, have to be appropriated by either the legislature or the county councils. And the prohibition is against the person or the contractor whose name is on the contract only. This is an example. If ABC Architects has a contract with the state, no funds may be contributed from the treasury of ABC Architects. However, officers, employees, and shareholders of ABC Architects may make contributions from personal funds. At this time, subcontractors to government contractors are allowed to contribute if they do not have a contract with the state or county.
Excuse me, I have a question from Janet.
Gary, why is it that the prohibition doesn't start until the contract has been executed? I mean, isn't there some risk that there will be pay-to-play activity during the competition to award the contract?
Yeah, I guess there would be that risk, but I mean, you have to be assured that the contractor is a state or a county contractor, and I think the obvious assurance is the signing of a contract.
Thank you.
Possible bills on this area. Number one is expanding the ban to include the owners, officers of the government contractors, including and also their immediate family members and employees. The second one is maybe trying to hit the subcontractors, but attempts have been made to expand the ban, but it has not been successful. And the primary reason is because there is no database that uniformly and timely reports who subcontractors are on state and county contracts. But we have other laws that, there's no apparent list, for example, false name contributions, but, we still have to investigate those. So maybe it's time to reconsider the ban of expanding the ban to subcontractors. The third one is prohibit Chapter 42 Legislative and County Council grants in aid recipients and those related to them from making contributions during the election period in which the grants are received. We had a question recently asking whether or not a grantee came under the contractor ban, and we had to tell the person no, because they're not providing services or any benefits to the state or county. Basically, these grants, as I believe these grants are to benefit or for the operation of the grantees' businesses. So it has come up, and this might be one area where we want to expand the ban.
Christian, if I have a question for Gary, it's kind of a follow-up with Janet's question. The statute, as you describe it, prohibits contributions between the execution and completion of the contract. as far as a possible bill, could that statute be amended to extend it to an earlier time when someone applies for a contract or enters a bid, when they're being considered for a contract? Would that be a feasible bill?
I'm not sure if it would be. I would have to study the procurement. I mean, I don't know all the stages of entering into a contract with a state or a county. I think if we can study that process and we can maybe find a concrete stage prior to the execution where the ban, where we could relate back the ban and it makes sense. So I think if we can study the process that a contractor goes through, we can make a better decision about whether or not it can be expanded that way. But that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chair Foley, I think it falls in the same vein of the subcontra issue. There have been attempts, but you know, the way the state and counties procurement processes work, they're all separate. And to maintain a uniform database, which is timely and updated, is not a resource that is accessible or available really in that type of. So for us to, of course, we would certainly want laws that we can enforce, and and I think that's it's a great idea. I just, in having done the subcontractor analysis, I guess my only comment at this point is if we had a good database for which state and counties will timely enter. Let's say they have an RFP out and would timely put in who's bidding on it. That's something we could look at. But right now, who knows? There's really nothing centralized for us to look at that's consistent. So I guess that's just my comment and concern, but I think it's a great idea.
Well, that's very helpful, Kristen. Thank you. Thank you, Gary.
So I guess we can talk more, but for the most part, just to get the consensus of the commission, does anyone have a problem with any of the concepts that we're throwing out? I guess I just want to make sure before we keep moving on, we're on the same page, or if there's any noted concerns or noted objections, if you could let us know.
I certainly support all the concepts myself.
Great ideas.
Okay. All right. Then I'll move on to enhancing the fundraiser ban. So the present law is you have to file a notice of intent to hold a fundraiser form prior to the having the fundraiser. And the fundraiser is defined as any function for the benefit of a candidate or committee that is intended or designed directly or indirectly to raise contributions for which the price or suggested contribution for attending the function is more than $25 a person. And the notice is, the requirement is that it has to be, signed, faxed, mailed, or delivered to the commission's office. Now, you all know, moving forward, we do have Senate Bill 555 relating to campaign fundraising. To my knowledge, it has not been signed by the governor. It's still on his desk, so it still exists as a Senate bill. And if you go to the next slide, you probably all know it prohibits elected state and county officials from holding any fundraiser, which includes a fundraiser event, to raise contributions for which any price is charged or any contribution is suggested for attendance during a regular or special session of the state legislature. Now, if this bill gets signed by the governor, it is effective January 1st, 2023. So it doesn't go into effect for this election cycle. But of course, moving on, there has been significant discussion about expanding the ban to not accepting or solicitation of campaign contributions during regular and special legislative session. But the only note I put here is whether there are considerations with the execution of this ban, including how it would be applied to elected officials running for executive or county offices, or whether we just limit it to just anyone running for the legislative session. And the second possible bill is requiring committees to file fundraiser notices regardless of the amount, so the ticket price does not have to be more than 25. And I don't know, Gary, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's what Senate Bill 555 currently doesn't doesn't have a fundraiser amount. Although it's a ban on fundraisers rather than the amount of the fundraiser to file a notice. Sorry, Gary, you're muted.
Yeah, that's correct.
So, okay, so going back to the slide, the second bullet really would be is we would submit a bill where you have to file a fundraiser notice regardless of the amount. The trigger wouldn't be $25. So it sounds like a lot of people support the first idea. I think I would, of course, would love to hear more conversation on how we handle people running for executive or county offices. So.
Kristen, do you want to go into that, or just with regards to the second one, requiring committees to file fundraiser notices? Do you mind, is the intent to give public disclosure that the fundraiser happened, past tense, or is it the intent to give people notice that they can go attend, see it, be there? Do you know sort of what the policy intent is there?
The policy intent is transparency, that an committee is having a fundraiser regardless of the amount, that it would be publicly noticed before the fundraiser were to occur. Of course, we tweet it, so if you wanted to attend it or want, you could, so that it's, to me, it's a, it could potentially be a win-win. But if you kept your ticket value to under 25, nobody would know. We wouldn't know. The public wouldn't know. And of course, sometimes if we do get notices of fundraisers where it is less than 25, but they still want us, we still publish it, because they want people to know they're having one. So I just figured, or we just figured, that just not have a value to it and just make it very transparent that they're having a fundraiser.
It's two questions. I think seems like pretty normal for people to wait to the last second to file the fundraiser notice.
Well, that's true too.
So I guess two questions, they go in different directions, to be clear. So they're, for purposes, just having a quick conversation. One, would it make sense potentially to require people to file some time period before the fundraiser if the intent is to allow people to potentially attend? Second question, going in a different direction, is you and I have both received concerns from candidates who are worried about safety and security of noticing their public fundraisers and potentially being now publicly available and publicly at a certain place where they potentially could be at risk. And so just sort of like, if you have any quick thoughts, if there's ways we want to address that.
Sure. I'm gonna, Gary or Tony, do you have a response to that?
Well, I mean, if there is a true fear, the candidate can choose not to have a fundraiser. I don't think these fundraiser notices are so much to get advertised that you're having a fundraiser. I think it's more because it's required by law. And that's why you do see a lot of last minute filings of these notices. For the government official who is running for office, again, I guess depending on what level what type of office you're holding, there is protection for the official. So yeah, I'm just not sure. I would have to look at this more, because I'm not sure that there is I'm going to be cynical here, but I'm not sure there's a true fear for one's safety, as opposed to they don't want to disclose the location of the fundraiser. Then people can track, all the Tony places that I don't mean Tony is in our Tony, but all the fancy places where these fundraisers are being held.
Well, I guess maybe the question would be would we get the level of transparency necessary if we allowed people to file and maybe even require more information post-event, with the idea that you know, is it necessary or is it useful for someone to be able to know and go attend that fundraiser because now they can go observe it and watch it, or would it potentially be able to satisfy and get the level of transparency by having it post-event, but maybe ask who showed up, who was there, or who gave, you know, like some, you know, something more specific. Again, you know, I don't have strong feelings much trying to drive it. I just know we've had complaints or concerns on both these fronts about how much time was given, and then two, that the safety and security concerns. And I have to imagine with the animosity that, you know, those concerns will escalate, at least in the near future.
Tony, do you have any comment as to this, particularly some history that might be predating the fundraiser notice requirement?
Just to address your first question, Robert, regarding setting a time period prior to the fundraiser in which these notices have to be filed. A lot of times, especially in big campaigns, these fundraisers are set up the day of. So if we were to set a time period, that might be an issue there. And then the second thing is, like Kristen said, a lot of this is transparency. These fundraiser notices are not meant to be invitations for the public to attend. In fact, most of them are private events. It's just notice for transparency reasons. So my only comment on that.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I do, Kristen.
Yes.
Senate Bill 555. No, our interim report, we had recommended that bill be amended to also include solicitation, no solicitation, and no contributions to legislators or candidates for the legislature during a session. That's not part of the bill that passed. Candidates is not part of the bill. Solicitation, donations are not part of the bill. And the bill was amended to apply to other state and county offices, but it's all geared to the session of the state legislature. And I really don't know how that's going to work. So I certainly would include solicitation and contribution bans and apply to candidates as far as the legislature. But I don't know how it works for county councils and mayors and other offices that are on a different cycle. Do you have any comment on that, Kristen?
Sure. I think that's why in that possible bill slide, I had that notation. I don't think, I don't know if Gary has a contribution to that concern, but we've been sort of running it back and forth in our minds too, because they all have different, you know, the county council, I don't think has a time that it's recessed, if you will, like, you know, it's pretty much year round. And what if you have a situation where, you know, some legislators sometimes are contemplating running for another spot, but ultimately settle for running for their seat again. So how do you handle these type of mixed interests, or, you know, you have to declare it? So I just don't know either how that, I'm totally open to any other suggestions, or we are.
Thank you.
All right, well then I guess we'll move on to our final area, which is increased penalties for violations and administrative investigative tools, which I'll hand over to Gary.
Okay, so we have a built into the Hawaii revised statutes for late reports. For most reports, there's a $50 fine per day for the first 7 days that a report is not filed when due, and then $200 per day thereafter. The fine cannot exceed 25% of the total amount of contributions or expenditures, whichever is greater, for the period covered by the report. And the minimum fine for a report filed more than 4 days after the due date is $200. For the second preliminary primary report and the second preliminary general report, these are the reports that are filed closest to the election. The fine is $300 per day. And again, the fine cannot exceed 25% of the total amount of contributions or expenditures, whichever is greater. And for these two reports, the minimum fine is $300. And the commission publishes the candidate committee's names on its website that have failed to file a report or timely correct the report. For other violations, the Hawaii statutes for an individual provides for a fine not to exceed $1,000 for each occurrence or an amount equivalent to 3 times the amount of an unlawful contribution or expenditure. For corporations, organizations, associations of labor unions, an amount not to exceed $1,000 for each occurrence. The violation may also be deemed to be also that of the individual directors, officers, or agents of the corporation or other organization who have knowingly authorized, ordered, or done any of the acts constituting the violation. So from a monetary standpoint, the fine is potentially higher for an individual as opposed to an organization like a super PAC. So currently, the commission can refer a matter for prosecution in lieu of a civil penalty. And on the criminal side, any person who recklessly, knowingly, or intentionally violates any provision of the campaign finance law is guilty of a misdemeanor. And any person who knowingly or intentionally falsifies any report required by this part with the intent to circumvent the law or deceive the commission, or who violates the anonymous contribution law or false name contribution law, is guilty of a Class C felony and not eligible for deferral. A person who is convicted under this section shall be disqualified from holding elected public office for a period of 4 years from the date of conviction. So SB 665 may have made changes to this law, the criminal part, and this one has been signed into law by the governor. So what this law does is it makes intentionally providing false information concerning the name or address of a person paying for a campaign advertisement a Class C felony. We have seen recent cases of this. Authorizes criminal prosecutions for violations in addition to criminal fines, so that it will allow the commission to levy a fine as well as refer the matter for prosecution. Prior to this law, commission had to pick. Increases the disqualification period for holding office upon a criminal conviction from 4 to 10 years. And it authorizes Attorney General or prosecuting attorney to commence prosecution of CISC violations without the need for a commission referral. So all of these are currently in effect. Possible bills. One is amendments to the penal codes to make candidates, non-candidate committees victims for purposes of theft fraud statutes. Affirmatively treating a candidate, non-candidate committee officers refuses to speak with CISC for purposes of an inquiry or investigation as a presumption in CISC's favor. This has recently happened. I had to send the committee a letter saying that at least the commission staff may look at a recommendation of a possible default since there was no reply. Listing on the CISC website all candidate, non-candidate committees who failed to register by filing an organizational report. consideration of any criminal fraud statutes to prevent, deter public corruption, which will be discussed at your next meeting. Provide support for HB 1423, SB 2044 next session. This one increases the fines for super PACs from 1,000 to 5,000, or up to 3 times the amount of the unlawful contribution expenditure, and permits the commission to order the super PAC officers to personally pay for the administrative fines. You know, we've been trying this bill since 2013, and although everyone's expressed support for it, it never passes. And also support HB 1426, SB 2041 for next legislative session. And this one would allows the CISC to have an order confirmed as a civil judgment, enforceable and collectible as any other judgment in the circuit court. Right now, enforcement is kind of clumsy. It's more like a criminal contempt enforcement mechanism. So we've been trying this particular bill for the 3 sessions now, and this is actually recommended by the Attorney General's Office, Civil Recoveries Division, who they help us enforce our commission orders.
I have a question, Kristen or Gary, just to make it clear, are all these possible bills supported by the Campaign Spending Commission?
Well, we know for sure the last 2 items because the commission has approved of those. We would have to take these before the commission, and we'll probably do that closer to like October, November. So we haven't raised this with the commissioners yet.
In your view, Gary, would all these bills make the commission more effective in carrying out its mandate?
You know, anything that discourages people from violating campaign spending laws would help, and I think all of these measures do that. I do think when we talk about other matters like full public funding, I think at the end of the day, though, I think increasing the criminal remedies, making the punishment jail time, and actually putting people in jail, I think that is going to do a lot to discourage violations. So that's just my opinion, by the way, not the commission.
Thank you, Gary. Robert, Nikos, do you have any questions?
No questions, thank you.
I think that's it, Kristen.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that some of the bills have not been set forth to our actual commissioners because some may affect criminal or statutes, not campaign finance statutes. So it really requires us to have the next conversation next time with Flo Nakakuni and see what materializes from there to see what could be potential tool sets or crimes or penalties that could transfer over to whether it's our chapter or the penal code. So it's just sort of to put it on the table as something to consider, but we don't have any jurisdiction over some of these statutes, and certainly we're not a criminal office. So but we thank you for the time. And I guess certainly if there's other questions and of course feedback from the public, we can, as this commission sorts through coming back to some issues, that's something we can discuss too.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Gary. If there's no further questions, I'd just like to highlight what Kristen said. For any members of the public that are watching this or that will watch it, you can submit testimony at any time or any suggestions, and we'll consider that. If there's nothing further under item number 4, thank you very much, Kristen. Excellent.
Thank you.
And the slideshow will also be posted on our webpage, which is part of the State House webpage. Other matters, I'll go to the commissioners, but I'd just like to remind the commissioners and members of the public, our next meeting, July 13, same time, same place, will address criminal prosecution and fraud, and then followed by the July 27th meeting, which will concern open government laws. We will be having subsequent public meetings after that, but we've yet to set them. Are there any other matters from any other commissioner? Flo? No. Robert?
Just restating for the record again, I think for the next meeting, if time allows, we should try to put on the agenda like 10 minutes, maybe to discuss future meetings, more as a procedural matter. And then secondly, I guess a question maybe for Kristen, would it be your intent to start drafting bills or concepts or from what was discussed, or what further steps do we need to take to run from here, I guess?
Okay, I have a suggestion along those lines. I wanted to contact everybody. Some people have been on bike rides, and but the way we've set it up, the first meeting was really organized and run by Robert Harris and focused on ethics. The last meeting was run by Common Cause and League of Women Voters, and that topic was, escapes me right now.
Elections.
Okay, elections, and then this meeting, and then we have the other meetings. The criminal prosecution fraud is going to be run by Flo, and then open government, I think it goes back to Common Cause and League of Women Voters. So what I want to do is encourage each sort of lead to start working with Casey on bills. I'm going to touch base with Casey from the legislature. We have to start working on bills now, and we have to start working on our committee report. And the sort of organization, I see it as the way we've organized this meeting. Like, we have the meeting on ethics and summarize that and the possible bills, and get the bills drafted, and then start drafting those bills and start discussing them. For members of the public that are watching, any bill we're going to be proposed will be out there for comment in a future meeting. So we're not just going to come up with a bill and send it over the legislature, because the devil's in the details. So I think we all have to start working on that, Robert, with Casey. And Casey has volunteered, as you know from the previous meetings, to write the bills under our direction and guidance.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I appreciate that, and I agree. And I think, certainly it was my intent to come back with bill proposals, and so working with Casey or sort of drafting in-house and then presenting. I guess the question would be, so for example, on the public finance elections, plainly I sort of heard the recommendation of potentially, for example, looking at trying to do a third-party study to make a broader recommendation and help fund that. Do we need to have more discussion sort of as a group of whether or not there may be other ideas being thrown in there? Again, I'm not trying to necessarily like go back to that conversation, but just as for example, other commission members may want to have other proposals, just want to make sure that there's a way of trying to filter through some of those.
Well, maybe that's something along with setting up the future meetings, putting that on the agenda as well for next meeting. How do we do that? And financing of elections is a good example. We can't start drafting bills unless we know what they're for. And how are we going to do that? Because it hasn't been resolved today, right? So, I mean, how does Kristen start working with Casey on a bill where the commission hasn't given any direction? At the last meeting, one of the things that was on the agenda for elections was for some reason a unicameral legislature. And I spoke my position that I would be opposed to proposing a constitutional amendment for a unicameral legislature as part of our report, that I thought that was best for a constitutional convention. Now, the commission hasn't decided that. So what do we do? So there are a lot of issues out there that are hanging, Robert, and we have to address that. So the question is, how do we best do that?
Maybe, I mean, so for example, there's nothing that stops this commission, for example, putting two bills forward. And again, I'm just using it as a hypothetical. There are nothing wrong with, for example, proposing, maybe it's a bad hypothetical and I apologize, maybe some more aggressive publicly financed election and maybe more of a review process. Again, it's a bad example, but something maybe more aggressive and something a little bit more in the middle, with the idea that you'd sort of have two different concepts there. And so if one doesn't go through, the other one is available for discussion. So I guess that's a way of saying maybe one approach we can take is have the facilitators come back in, say, 2 meetings with sort of here are the bills they're working on or have done, rules they're working on or have done, with the idea of sort of trying to, either give others an opportunity to suggest, hey, maybe we need to do something else, or to push back, or, just sort of like putting pen to paper and actually having, okay, we've discussed these things, here's what we're actively going to be working on.
So that sounds great. So would we do that as far as scheduling future meetings?
So maybe next meeting, we can actually sort of lay out the next 4 or 5 meetings. And one of those probably should be either focused specifically on this, or at least half of it's dedicated to this, of just trying to lay out roadmaps of here's what's being worked on.
Yeah. And there's a number of topics I can think of. For example, I was discussing one with Nicholas when I sort of welcomed him to the commission, our private conversation, initiative and referendum. We've had multiple views on that from people that have testified to members of the commission. And obviously there's arguments pro and con. And clearly, I think for the committee report, we have to discuss the issue. We have to lay out the pros and cons. Commissioners may have different views, and then we will express that, and that's fine. Our interim report, commissioners had different views on certain proposals, and we just laid it out. The majority of the commission thinks this, other commissioners think that, but I think it's important that we discuss them, we lay out the pros and cons. If we can, as a commission, I would prefer we make a recommendation, even though it's not unanimous, but we don't need to. Ultimately, it'll be the legislature that decides. But I think we should put that all on our agenda for discussion on how to proceed. And I think generally along the lines you lay out, Robert, sound good to me. And we'll just discuss it at our next meeting under other matters. Does that sound right, Robert? Or?
It sounds great. I guess I think if I were to characterize, I think I came in with some specific recommendations, got some specific feedback, and sort of ready to go, racing off with, full drafting and being ready to go. If, I had reviewed the last meeting and I felt came across as maybe more informational, and then this meeting's maybe sort of in the middle a little bit of that. And so I just want to make sure they're sort of clear, like we're really making sure everyone's satisfied that the right work's getting done. And if, for example, I'm running in a direction somebody else doesn't agree with, I want to make sure they have plenty of opportunity to raise their hand, or if they want to put pen to paper and put another idea out there, that we're sort of getting that opportunity there. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I just want to make sure that we're very transparent about what's being worked on, and we're making sure nothing's being dropped.
Okay. Christian, Nikos, hello?
No, I
Anybody?
follow.
No? What, Christian?
I follow. I'm following the conversation, and I think everything that we proposed, as if it falls within our statutes, in let's say in contrast to the criminal stuff, I can't really put forth a bill that impacts the penal code, and I wouldn't unless I've talked, I think it has a lot more impact coming from the commission. But, we've already internally discussed potential bills. So we intend to continue along that path. And I appreciate the discussion now because, of course, as we're going into August, my office is going to we already are pretty much overwhelmed because leading up to the primary is pretty heavy hitters here. So, but that is in the back of our mind. So we're doing our best. I can tell you right now, if this whole commission wanted full public funding, and had a formula, we would be happy to run the numbers. But my concern is, you need the funding. And that's why I really would prefer having a study done so it's strategic and it's smart and the state invests in it, in its future, rather than having a 5-person agency with 5 volunteer commissioners rally for the money and it doesn't happen. And it would consume our time. And we, of course, I think everybody wants us to be front and center with this 2022 election. So just my comments, but I'm on the same page with you, Robert and Chair Foley.
Okay. Are there any other matters?
I'm in general agreement, and I think that there are, just judging by this afternoon's presentation, it's clear that there's what I would classify as lower hanging fruit, things that can be done, like with respect to authorized candidate expenditures, that maybe we could see some draft bill language that we could consider. Whereas something like, the move toward enhancing our current public financing system, whether it be through increasing the amount that people can provide on their tax returns or legislative appropriation or any number of factors, or even just having a commission do further inquiry, will take a little bit more of a extended deliberation amongst our commission members.
I think that's an excellent point and suggestion, and maybe each one of us should be mindful of that. At the end of each one of these public hearings, if there are some of those that look to be that low-hanging fruit, as Nico said, where there seems to be consensus and no opposition, maybe we can start working on those bills. Ultimately, those bills come back to the commission and come back to public hearings to be discussed and considered, but there's no reason to wait on those. So I think that's a good point, Nicholas. I agree. Are there any other matters from any other commissioner? Okay, so that will be it for today. Thank you for those that have watched on YouTube or will watch on YouTube. Thank you for the witnesses. Thank you for the special guests. Thank you for Mr. Wade, who may be sleeping, for his excellent presentation and also being available. Thank you for Gary Hooser for recommending that we contact Mr. Wade. So with that, thank you very much, and good to have you on board, Nicholas. Meeting adjourned.